Hey everybody, it's Kyle Van Voors with Voors.com, and today we're going to discuss the game theory of cold calling. Let's dive right in. Alrighty, so I'm going to get pretty theoretical on you. I know you like very tactical concepts, but today we're going to be going a little deep. What exactly is going on in a cold call? And I actually use a kind of an outline from game theory to really illustrate what's going on. So we're going to go through some material. We're going to talk cold calling a little bit. Some of you might disagree. This is just based on my experience, so let me know what you think in the comments. And if you like this kind of content, hit the like button, subscribe. But no further ado, let's walk right through it. All right, everybody, so let's walk through this matrix of exactly what's going on in a cold call. And every cold call has the same two people, right? You have an SDR, BDR, whatever you call it, and then you have the prospect. And the SDR, they're doing everything they can to try to convince that prospect to take a meeting, right? And the prospect at first is trying to do whatever they can to convince the SDR to please let them hang up the phone, right? But on the other side, if the SDR is successful, they build curiosity because there's a problem, there's a need that that prospect has, a solution that they're looking for, and the SDR will build enough curiosity in order to get that meeting scheduled. So I'm going to walk through this matrix specifically along two key things, which is convincing and curious. So if the SDR here is convincing and the prospect is convincing, put those two lines together, they're button heads. That's exactly what this is referring to, right? So this is when the prospect and the SDR are trying to convince each other whether they should or should not have another call. These are typically the more aggressive cold calls you run into. A lot of them, they hang up onto you right away. But if you can identify that you're in that kind of mode, you can switch what you're doing in order to change the tone of the conversation and potentially change the ultimate result of the conversation, which in most cases is hanging up. Let's try to get a meeting on the calendar. The next part here is convincing. If the SDR is convincing and the prospect is curious, this is the dream, right? If the SDR is doing a good job and they've uncovered a need and they identified a pain point with the prospect, that prospect is now curious. This is a match made in heaven. They're curious to learn more. A meeting will typically get booked. Now, what happens if the SDR is curious, right? Like, is there a fit here? You're trying to learn more and understand if there's a problem. And the prospect is convincing, hey, I need to get off of this phone. This is really bad. They're just going to hang up on you, right? Because the SDR doesn't have the confidence and the authority to be in that convincing state like we talked about earlier, right? So they're not butting heads. They're getting bulldozed over by the prospect. This is really what you want to avoid. And you avoid this by having very good messaging, understanding the buyer when you call them. Those types of things allow you to have the confidence and authority you need to really make a convincing argument to the prospect or have a convincing conversation in order to convince them to have a meeting. All right, and then finally here we have curious and curious. What happens when the SDR is curious and trying to figure out what's, if this is going to be a good fit or not, but can't really tell, and the prospect's also curious and it's like, I don't even know. Well, if you're an SDR, you've been through this before. This is when you just say, why don't we set aside 30 minutes to have a conversation about how we can help your company? And they randomly say yes. And then you hang up the phone. You're like, I can't even believe that happened, right? We've all been there before. That's what's going on there is both of you are unsure. The SDR lacked the confidence to be able to assert themselves or even lack the skill set to be able to navigate that conversation correctly. And they're just going in circles trying to uncover something. And the prospect is like, I guess I'm along for this ride, but I don't know what's going on either. And depending on the personality of that person, a meeting can get booked, but typically they don't, right? These are very random. Anyway, that's it. That's from my perspective, the game theory of cold calling. This is how often I see calls going, and you're really sliding along that axis. Either you're convincing the prospect, you're curious to learn more, and as you slide along, the prospects are sliding along in their side as well, and hopefully we meet somewhere that works for both of us and gets a meeting on the calendar. But if there is no fit, there's no fit, we move on. This is the story of cold calling. If you've been doing this for a long time, I'm sure this will resonate with you. I appreciate you watching, and we will talk soon.